4 fascinating presentations. I certainly learned an awful lot in the last hour or so. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. So let me just go right to the audience. And do we have a question from the audience? Gavin? Go ahead. Do we have a microphone that's circulating around?
Thank you. This question is for Zorana about the storm sensor product. I work for a mining company, and I'm wondering if this could be also used to assess risk for, say, tailings ponds, like if they'd be at risk of overflowing or breaching.
So the sensors that we use are ultrasonic sensors that monitor depth. So if that is the metric that could be used for those ponds, I'm not really familiar with different mining methods, but if that is your base way of measuring level, then that is something you could use, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi there. I actually have a couple questions, please. So the first one was, forgive me, this would be for Jordan on LEED. Is there an anticipated change with what would commonly be referred to as viable points in the vertical sector? Things like putting in a bike rack or shower that doesn't get used or things like that. And then my second question on that would be, not on that, but similar, would be the follow-up on LEED certified buildings or similar, where you've got building owners that, I hate to say it, put things in place and then remove them.
So unfortunately, there are major changes happening to the green LEED and the green building certifications. Yep. Can you hear me now? Okay, there we go. So there's major changes that are going to be happening to LEED. We're expecting it later this year, around September, for around the Green Build conference, that they're going to be announcing some major changes. But currently, LEED doesn't have a way of sending somebody to a project down the line, like maybe 5 years down the line, to make sure that the things that they put in place at the time of design and construction are still there. But they, in a slight sense, they have they require water and energy data reporting up until 5 years post construction. So that's one way of verification. But you know, there's nothing concrete yet. I don't know, especially as we're moving towards a greater focus on existing buildings. There may be changes there. But for now, the way that LEED operates is that it certifies a building as is upon completion. So unfortunately, no. I wish it was different, honestly, because you know, it's in my best interest, as somebody who is an environmentalist, for these buildings to continue to operate as intended and as constructed. But you know, unfortunately, there's not something like that in place. But I do want to say that there is a focus on commissioning for LEED projects that sort of identify maybe some issues in the beginning to prevent ongoing maintenance and system changes for a building. So that sort of relates to that a little bit, but other than that, no.
Thank you.
Do we have another question? All right, I'll ask one. I'll ask one. Jordan, you talked about, you used the analogy of going to a good place. We've heard some great stories today, and some of them are anecdotal, some are very futuristic looking. What do we do first if we are, and this is for all of the whole panel, what do we do first and second in terms of, if we own and operate an industrial facility, a commercial facility, what are simply just good, basic, foundational things to do? And anybody could jump in on that.
I think the first thing you have to do is ask questions. So if we're talking about sustainability from not only an environmental and economically sustainable perspective, but also a socially sustainable perspective, it starts with asking questions to the people who already exist in the community, like I mentioned previously, and asking questions to your future stakeholders, asking questions to ownership, like what is your intention with building your building this way? What is the true intention of, what is the purpose of the building in its place in this society? I think all good comes from gathering more information at the beginning, and an informed decision often is a better decision. So I think that's the first step that you can take, in my opinion.
I do have one comment on that, and in some of the sessions I have tomorrow, we'll address that better. But I think one of the first steps you can take is to measure your own greenhouse gas emissions, your own accounting. Figure out where you are. I'm sure with your helicopters, you probably measure that because it's like you have to pay for all that jet fuel, right? So, but there's a lot of other things, obviously in the leads thing, you're looking at the supply chain side, and that's obviously very, very important. You buy concrete, it's got a lot of embedded energy. You buy all of these things. So you could look at how, where you stand. My biggest greenhouse gas footprint is getting the plane flight to come down here this year, and I have to somehow make up for that carbon, all right?
I was going to say it's an offset.
Yeah, I need an offset for that.
How wide do you cast the net for stakeholder communities in creating a solution?
Are specifically talking about green building, or?
Well, go ahead.
I mean, for green building, the earth is the community. I mean, like I said in my presentation, we think we're making one decision, but we're actually making several decisions. So, I think that we can always ask a little more of each other when it comes to making the right decisions, whether that be opting for the wood that's FSC certified as opposed to one that's not, or opting for a low VOC paint as opposed to one that's not, or improving the ventilation of your office building so your employees don't get sick. We're all connected to each other in one way or another, and so it's sort of a hippy-dippy answer, but
hippy-dippy's fine. So then, Jordan, let me ask you. Going back, let's think a little bit about those 17 SDGs, and how do we then weight the various factors when some of these stakeholder communities conflict? My phone may be built by slave labor. My EV battery may be built by child labor in the Congo. People in Africa may not get food because fertilizer creation and sales to Africa conflicts with EU green goals. How do we really try to rationalize those competing issues?
So there's a really great book by Paul Hawken called Drawdown, and it is a book about the top 100 solutions there are to climate change, and I believe it's number 2 is educating women. And the reason for that is when women have a higher level of education, more often than not, that means that they have greater autonomy for their own lives, and they can make a decision about whether or not to have children, and more often than not, that leads to smaller families, lower population, etc. And by having fewer people on the planet or fewer people contributing to the global issues, then you have a more sustainable planet. And then there's 99 other solutions, and you'd be surprised about where things fall. But that is why reading that book is why I am so passionate about the social aspect of sustainability, because it really just shows that the solution can't just be the technical stuff. It also has to be, the less technical stuff and the more social stuff as well.
Quick question, Jim.
Go ahead.
Hi, Peter Manos with ARC. This might be for you, Zorana, more than the other panelists, but anyone chime in. When you look at water infrastructure and hardening of infrastructure, what are you seeing and expecting with respect to the Inflation Reduction Act and other infrastructure legislation, and it seems that the investments that's going to be needed to harden our shorelines and our water infrastructure is something that's going to have to be shared by industry and in ways that might not have been fully comprehended yet. It's a big number, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'll speak specifically about Florida and a few other Gulf states. So a lot of states now have resiliency coalitions or resiliency offices, and they are working to disseminate funding for capital improvement planning that is water related, water infrastructure related. So what communities can do, or what anybody can do in a government space or industrial space, is take a look at those funding opportunities. If you're an industrial user of water, right, everyone has permits that they have to abide by if they use water in their production. How can you become a better contributor in those conversations so that the right project is done? Because there's only X amount of funding available. So how do you do the risk assessment and decide where to spend your capital improvement project money? Personally, I think, the risk assessment is the hardest part of it to do, because traditionally when it comes to stormwater, which is a big chunk of what we do, it always came back to FEMA, but that's only one metric. So how do you use multiple metrics? And that kind of leads back to which one do you prioritize? And I think each community is going to have to make that choice for themselves.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I just noticed that we're over time. So I would just like to ask all of our speakers today to summarize give us all a final statement, and we'll call it a day.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Again, my name is Zorana, and I'm with Storm Sensor, and I hope you kind of think about stormwater in the future and where it goes, and use the knowledge that we gained today about digitalization of things that we have not thought about before.
Thank you, everyone. Building on that, I'm Jordan Brown. My company that I work at is Runbrook. And I hope my presentation sort of gave you further insight into how green building is changing and helped you feel a little more connected to the environment.
Thank you guys for coming, and if there is anyone that is interested, I would like to see the FEMA along with storm. I know we didn't have a chance to talk about that today, but being the principal on 2 major storms, I am very concerned about the I loved what Jim showed on the Venn diagrams, because a lot of that gets lost in storm. And I really think there needs to be national policy around storm and companies that are respondents to storm, because the implications for the environment for the companies that arrive on storm are basically at 0. And I would really like to see some initiatives going toward that.
As an engineer that worked in the oil and gas industry, I hope you find that my own personal initiatives might have motivated you to do something similar. I also would mention and I would promote that I have 2 sessions for tomorrow. One is decarbonizing the production of electric power, and the second is decarbonizing the production of oil and gas products. So even the oil industry can become a little greener.
Thanks for that plug, Rick. I'll put in a plug for Gretchen. She's speaking also on Thursday morning with additional information on drones with Tim Shea. Tim, raise your hand. Okay, on Thursday morning. So I'd just like to thank this panel. It was great. I learned an awful lot today. So let's give them all a round of applause.